Lisa had it, she found it.
So we're back, you're back, appreciate that, and with this I suggest we'll just launch straight into any questions that you might have. If you wouldn't mind identifying yourself, we have a microphone going around, or about to go around. Please.
Hi, Bill Sloan from I'm just wondering, what are the prospects now at the end of this 10-year period of what I would think would be a great deal of frustration? What are the prospects for offshore wind energy up and down the coast? I mean, is that still 50 years away, or with similar fights, or is this done it for everybody?
I think the prospects for offshore wind up and down the Atlantic coast are excellent. The reality is, in the energy business, it really takes a long, long time for real game changers to happen. We used to shovel coal in our basements into a furnace, and it took 50 years to get a penetration of oil and gas heaters in people's homes. The reason I think offshore wind has a real future is because, A, I believe that our strongest instinct is self-preservation. And I really do believe that political leaders are going to wake up, and they'll wake up a lot faster if people in this room turn this into a movement to really try to arrest the greatest environmental challenge that we face, something that is threatening our children and our grandchildren. The reason it has potential is because coal is dead. Look at the Atlantic seaboard. You're not going to build coal. You're not going to build nuclear anytime soon. We don't have land. We have our options are natural gas, wind, solar, and most of it's offshore wind because we don't have the land space.
For Greg Watson, I was fascinated to hear how much you talked about taking carbon out of the air and putting it back in the soil. You talked about biochar, and I think there was also some things about decarbonization, just using manure. And I'm not sure I caught everything you said. Several years ago, somebody came up to me and said, hey, you can put carbon back in the soil in rangelands, and you graze cattle on there, and dung beetles will take your manure and put it back underground. And he came out with an estimate, which is on my CD, of about 2 tons per acre per year. Do you have any sense of how that compares with what you can do either with biochar in terms of tons per acre per year, or just gardening, or somewhat larger scale but fairly organic or almost organic farming and putting manure in the soil to recarbonize it?
Yeah, and actually the scaling, the example you use is actually a pretty interesting one. A number of years ago I actually did work at the Nature Conservancy. Clearly I'm a person that can't hold on to a steady job, but it was at the Conservancy, and I remember them actually talking about restoring the Great Plains, and one of the things they realized they needed to do, and again this is sort of picking up on the mimicking nature and understanding how nature did, was the reintroduction of the great bison, right? Because and the hoofed ungulates, and that was a very important role they played in stabilizing and enhancing a natural ecosystem. So that part was very important. I think it was even Norman Schwarzkopf who's headed that campaign for the Nature Conservancy. I think the estimates right now are saying that with biochar, and they don't see that right now, again, understand some of this is very early stages of experimentation, but they don't see that there's a limit in terms of the capacity to store carbon with biochar. In some cases, they think that the amount of carbon stored beneath in the soils can actually match the carbon that's stored in the plant life above. So you really are talking about being able to do a tremendous amount of carbon storage. And that's why, again, the point I really want to make today is that when we talk about climate stabilization, climate change, we don't normally see agriculture playing a big role, but in meeting our basic needs, we're always gonna have to eat. And we're, again, population's increasing, so we really wanna make sure that part is in the equation and we look at the potential, which I think is pretty tremendous.
I
Thanks for
wanted
the
to
question.
comment with the situation in the permafrost. With the situation with carbon starting to come out of the permafrost, I think that's wonderful news.
Yes, please. Just same row, just a little further down.
Hello, my name is Alex. Just had a question about siting for Ms. Watson. For greenhouses on roofs, how is there a protocol that you're working out? You mentioned the company in Montreal that put the greenhouses on. Perhaps there's a way of, I don't know if the weight is possible, with the weight of putting the trailers, the hydroponic farms on top of roofs, and if there's a standardized protocol for leases, stuff like that.
Most of the farms that are being discussed really are hydroponic because for lots of reasons. And some of these companies, again, Loofah being one, but the others have actually come up with designs that they feel really can. Again, structural design, you've got to, that's case by case basis. What the city of Boston, and among others, is doing though is by going through the process of zoning. And I don't know if again, what the point they made was if something is not zoned for in a particular region, it means it's not allowed. And so what you have to do in order to allow for something to happen, to be built or created, you zone for it. I came in the middle of a 2-year zoning process for urban agriculture, which meant that everything had to be defined. Everything, including, again, the structures, the protocols for greenhouses on top of buildings. Perhaps the biggest, and Jim will love this, one of the first reactions, there were NIMBYs who did not want to see these structures from the ground. And so they started talking about setbacks, and we started talking about setbacks and not being able to use the parapets and having to build right on top of the flat surface. That became a structural issue. So they're trying to overcome those, but there are some standards. If you're at all interested, the zoning draft regs for at least for the city of Boston are online at the Boston Redevelopment Authority. If you just go City of Boston and just do BRA and urban agriculture, you'll get the whole Article 89.
All right, there's one back here, one to the right, so Lisa will give you a lot of exercise here. So we'll just move our way forward and then over to my left.
Hi, my name's Isaac. My question is for Mr. Watson. Have you encountered any competition, or do you expect to encounter any competition between on-site generation of renewable energy and rooftop agriculture?
Good question. Conceivably, I mentioned that there was probably was premature, and I said there's uncontested, those open space for these, for the rooftop gardens or greenhouses. There's no question that, for instance, the city, once again, in most cities that are looking to become green, that includes solar, as well as the rooftops. I think that probably plenty of room, hopefully. I guess here's what I would say. I would love to be in a situation where we felt that we were competing and did not have enough roof space to accommodate the solar and the rooftop greenhouses and farms. So I'm looking forward to that day, then we'll talk about how we'll resolve that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is John Cranston. I have a general overall question. Louis, you brought it up. We have our new supply, very large supply of gas and oil coming online from, the United States from this fracking, which has kept the price, brought the price down. And our main concern is to eliminate or reduce our reliance on carbon and fossil fuels. And to do that, we need to use other alternative fuels, and they need to be competitive with this oil and gas. On a macro level, price is equal to supply and demand. If the supply of this stuff is going up, right? And the demand is kind of staying the same. The price is going to go down for those very things that we need to not use. How, I mean, realistically, do you guys think that this is doable, where we can use solar and wind at a competitive level and with the free market as the driving factor?
Well, that's sort of the $64,000 question. I think the answer is yes, but obviously what you have is a situation, this is not news to any of you. On the fossil side, you've got all kinds of unpriced problems. So it's not a classic free market, right? And so that's why you do have public policy. That's why you do have support for solar and wind. But I think having said that, the Chinese example I used, I think there is a trend where these technologies clearly are coming down in price significantly, whether it's wind, onshore or offshore over time. Same thing with solar. So I think you have to have price competition. You're going to have to win that game. I think ultimately you can, but I think one of the ways in which that's going to happen, though, is that we begin to price the value of these technologies, where they are located, and the kind of benefits they provide to customers. And Jim was talking about offshore wind as a reliability factor, as a hedging factor against over-reliance on fossil within systems. If you look to things like power outages in Sandy and Irene, we underpriced the value of having power that's available. We lose hundreds of billions of dollars each year through those kinds of outages. So, if you look to classic, kind of business theory about products, you give customers what they want. There has to be customer value in these technologies. I think what we've done for the last 10 or 15 years is, finance these technologies, whether it's wind or solar, kind of indiscriminately a little bit. And that I think over time, as we get more sophisticated with the value they actually provide, we'll start pricing that value. And as you price that value, you start to get a better competition against the alternative. So I think we're going to start seeing a more sophisticated sense of that over time.
I just want to make a comment, and I think Lou probably hit on the most important thing. The cost of energy isn't just contained on your electric bill or your natural gas bill. By using renewable energies, we avoid the external costs of burning fossil fuels. And when somebody thinks that coal costs 6 cents a kilowatt, and you look at the Harvard Global Health Study, where they did a study calculating the external costs of coal, including health factors, environmental degradation, they said that those costs amounted to 18 cents, then add the 6 cents to it. So I think it's what we need to do as consumers, what we need to do as citizens, is to start really thinking about what is the true cost of our energy. And it's not only avoiding the external costs of fossil fuels, but let's start thinking about, like the Mass Department of Public Utilities did in the case when they evaluated Cape Wind's electricity. We're getting probably, when we start in 2015, we'll probably get 20 cents a kilowatt for the electricity. But when you inject a no fuel cost fuel, when you bid a zero fuel cost into a competitive power pool, what happens is you suppress the clearing price of electricity, because we'll always be operating. So if we're producing 300 megawatts, we displace the most expensive price that sets the clearing price for all kilowatts generated in that hour. So in the case of Cape Wind, I'd ask a question: would you pay a premium on 1% of something if it reduced the price of the remaining 99%? So these are the things that we need to think about. What is the true cost, and what are the added benefits of producing local renewable energy in terms of jobs, keeping the dollars in the community?
always too excited by these to contain my thoughts. Rich Giordano, person attending classes. Louis, just back to your Earl Butts piece. I love that. Who said, what was it, Greg? Greg said Earl Butts? There's a movie called King Corn, in which they actually go back and interview Earl Butts, and he talks about, it's like the smoking gun, he talks about the industrialization of agriculture and the political policy of making food cheap through this whole thing. It's going to be shown in Mission Hill next Thursday night. I can give people the particulars if they want it. It's a video, you can get it in Netflix too, King Corn. But it's a lot of fun because two Harvard kids go back and grow corn on an acre of land and find out what agribusiness is all about. But maybe it was Louis then. A question. The issue of storage for sustainable energy. I'm not the expert. I'm parroting what I heard in the first class from John from Harvard, the Institute, who was basically saying the problem is not storage, the problem is scale. And that if you look at statewide, monstrous, in other words, systems of wind and solar, and couple that with things like, innovative things like storage of compressed air in caverns and that sort of thing. He's saying that in theory, you could solve the storage issue because you'd have alternating sustainable energy production from solar at one point, wind at another, and storage in compressed air at another. So, but what do you think about that?
I don't pretend to be a storage expert. I know there's that thinking there. Jim may have a different take on this. That I think in Europe there's a lot of consideration given to whether if you have enough of it in the distributed level, that you may eliminate the need for storage in some way. I think that may be true, but I think it's a bit idealistic, and that I think to get from here to there, that solving the storage problem, or at least coming up with less expensive, more pervasive uses of storage to counteract the intermittency is sort of a necessary part of getting to this transition. In other words, I think we just can't assume scale and then say that's going to solve the problem. We have to get the scale. And I think in order to get the scale, beginning to solve some of the storage problem, in turn, I think enables you to get to scale in a more in a sensible way, and then maybe you will get there and it may become unnecessary. But Jim, you may have a different take on this. I mean, that's pretty much, I think, at least a kind of a common sense take on this, that it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. And so you may be able to model a situation where you don't need it, but as a practical matter, I think between now and then you will.
Two more questions. This one here on the left-hand side.
Bryce Hughes, Orchid, JP Morgan. Kind of already answered, but I guess going back on Louis talked a lot about the price of renewables needing to cross at some point, and you talked about, I guess, for Cape Wind, you're selling power, it's going to be 19 cents a kilowatt hour, increasing it up to 3.5% a year. Where do the lines cross versus what you were saying, kind of sacking ratepayers with increased costs to bring more gas, versus building a 300 megawatt gas facility somewhere and finding another way to mitigate the carbon offsets? Is there how does that physically thought through for the project? I guess more of a question. Already answered. Just for gas versus coal. You said coal is 24 cents with the price of carbon. Is there a way to price gas that would be cheaper than
Yeah.
Cape Wind?
Well, let me say, having been in this industry for almost 40 years, I can tell you one thing. The cure for looking at gas prices, the cure for cheap prices is cheap prices. The volatility of natural gas. In 1999, I had all these experts telling me that natural gas was going to stay down, for years. We sold our we took a contrarian position and sold our natural gas plant portfolio in 1999. the price of natural gas started to take off and went from $2.50 over the ensuing years to, in New England, at some points it hit, you know, $12 an MCF. So all the United States government has to do is start releasing these export licenses where we're going to start exporting natural gas, where some of the petrochemical plants start saying, gee, gas is cheap, let's start, you know, building these huge plants that are a huge gas suck. I just don't, you know, it seems everybody wants to put their eggs in the natural gas basket, and I think that in looking at running a utility, and providing electric service, it's not just the cheapest price that is the answer. You know, you need fuel
Portfolio,
diversity.
right, yeah.
You need risk management. Just like if we went to J.P. Morgan, they wouldn't put all our money in one stock.
Absolutely. Thank you. Many thanks to all of you, and especially to our three speakers tonight. And an invitation to all of you, including our speakers tonight, to the next installment here of our Open Classroom series on urban adaptation. And we'll have again three speakers: Larry Atkinson, who's at Old Dominion University, who has for many years dealt with issues of climate change and sea level rise at the local scale. Brian Helmus, who is a new faculty member here at the university, at Northeastern University, who is heavily focusing on the role of ocean ecosystems in helping us be protected against some of the rising tides. And Pablo Suarez, who for many years has been leading the initiative at the Red Cross, Red Crescent on climate change adaptation at an international scale. And all three of them will bring very unique perspectives to this issue of urban adaptation to climate change. I invite you to be part of that discussion. See you then.